Hey guys, it's Cara, my review for Stranger Things Season 3. And what the season is essentially about is it takes place roughly a year after the events of Season 2. Basically, all of the characters are enjoying themselves. We see, 11 and Mike are officially a couple now. The gang is the closest that they've ever been and things like that. However, even though they are in good spirits, there's this mall that's opening and things like that, Will starts to sense that something more sinister is going on, and 11 and Max also start to sense it as well, and very quickly, everyone starts to realize that there is something very, very disturbing coming at the Starcourt Mall, and they have to do what they can to try to team up and stop whatever this threat may be. So, Stranger Things Season 3, you guys know I was absolutely hyped for this season. If you guys go back to my anticipated video for, for the summer, all the shows I was looking forward to, I put Stranger Things at number 1, mainly because I just thought there were so many possibilities for what they could do with this season, coming off the heels of Season 2, which basically felt like a wrap-up of the, first half of the story. Season 3 really seemed like it was going to explore new ground. It was going to be something different for the show, and I was excited to see what exactly they were going to do with it. I was really hoping it could be something really great, and look, going into a show like Stranger Things Season 3, when you have your expectations as high as I did, you're pretty much preparing yourself to be let down, but I have to say, I wasn't let down at all. If anything, Stranger Things Season 3 exceeded my expectations. This is not only the best season of the entire show, but it really does explore new ground that we just have not seen before with this show, and really takes it to new heights. We're just getting to right now, starting off with the cast. And look, I mean, what is there to say about this ensemble that hasn't been said before? I think it's one of the best casts working on TV right now. Everyone really does an incredible job. Winona Ryder is great as usual, as she is in the first two seasons. She doesn't have as much to do this season as she did in the first two, but she still does play a really great role here. Joyce this season, after mourning Bob and things like that, she's had some time to mourn him. She's a little bit more at peace. She's basically the calmest we've ever seen her, and I thought Ryder did a very good job with that for sure, and I definitely did like what she did, but it really is David Harbour who steps up here. I think he was probably the MVP of the season in terms of acting. I thought he did such an incredible job this season. Hopper goes through a lot of different places this year. He is officially sort of like that father to 11, so he's kind of trying to deal with that, but he also has this other stuff that he's dealing with, and these two, we really explore the bonding between him and Joyce really well, and the bonding between him and Winona Ryder is still really great. Those two have such great chemistry, and they really do work very well together, but like I said, it really is Harbour who steps up here, and I think gives maybe the best performance we've seen from him on this show yet. Someone who is always a standout, though, and that's certainly not any different this season, is Millie Bobby Brown as 11, who 11 this season, she's in a bit of a different place, because while the first season she was basically, sort of like this outcast who just didn't really belong in the world, and then season 2 she was trying to find herself, this season she's a lot more confident. This is a much more human 11 than we've ever seen before, and that's really great to see. I really love the places that Brown does go as an actress, and you really do see how far 11 has come as a character. But she definitely still has that badass side to her that we expect for her to have, and she does such a great job with that. For those who were worried that 11 would get shortchanged this season, she has a lot more to do. Brown really steps up, and it really does show how much she has also evolved as an actress since the first two seasons. She is one of the best working today, without a doubt, one of the best young actresses out there, and this season very much proves why. And as usual, the rest of the cast also does a fantastic job. Wolfhard is still great as Mike, Caleb McLaughlin, Gaten Matarazzo, all of them really do a great job. Noah Schnapp as Will is still fantastic this season. Though he is not as heavily involved as he's been in the previous two, he is still a huge standout here. And I have to say, out of all of the, young boys, I think he's probably the best dramatically. There are a few scenes with him this season that honestly had me on the verge of tears. I don't want to get into it too much, but what he's going through this season, I think is going to be very relatable for some people. It certainly hit close to home for me at points, and I think they did a really great job with that, and that really is due to Schnapp's acting here, which is just on fire as it's always been. But this season especially, he continues to show just how amazing of an actor he really is. Sadie Sink has a lot more to do this time around as Max, and I thought she was so great here, but her chemistry with Millie Bobby Brown is a huge standout. I love the bonding between these two. They really play around with that dynamic quite well, and I really loved the chemistry between the two of them. Sadie Sink and Millie Bobby Brown have such a natural chemistry that I was very happy that we tapped into this season. The other actors are really great too, like, of course, Charlie Heaton, Natalia Dyer is really great. Dacre Montgomery gets a lot more to do as well, though, this time around, and I thought he was fantastic this season. I don't want to say too much more about him, but I wasn't really a huge fan of him in the last season, if you remember. I thought that his acting was good, but I didn't really feel like they gave him enough to do. This season very much makes up for that, and I thought he was phenomenal. I love where they end up going, and he honestly is one of the standouts of this entire season. Joe Keery is always a standout as Steve, and he is just as good, if not better, than he was in Season 3, and I really he's such a likable and fun character, and he has changed so much since the first season, and Keery just does such a great job with this role, and that definitely is no different here. But someone who I think everyone's going to be talking about is Maya Hawke as this new character, Robin, who... Honestly, Robin is a character that, yes, she is a new character, but she fits so well into this ensemble that, I was having a conversation with, like, my mom because she was also watching this show. She thought that she didn't realize that she was a new character. That's how well she really does blend in here, and she is just so great in the show. The chemistry she has with Steve and all of them is so great, and her dry wit and her sarcastic sort of edge to her, it's just great, and Hawke just does such an incredible job, and I cannot wait to see what she's going to do next. She's going to be a huge star after the show for sure. I just know it, and I absolutely loved her in the show. She was an excellent addition, and they definitely put her to good use for sure. This is not like a Billy where they just did not know what to do with her. No, she had a very good finite purpose. It was very well established, and I thought they did a really great job with her. Priah Ferguson also is a really great addition. Even though we've seen her before, she has an extended role this season. Really, everyone does an incredible job. Even smaller roles like Carrie Elwes as this mayor, or Brett Gelman, who has a lot more to do this time around. Francesca Reel does a really great job. Alex Udgoff as this character, Alexi. I mean, everyone really does do an incredible job this season. I really did love everyone here. But now I really want to get to the directing and the writing, which is the best thing about this season, without any doubt. What I love about the Duffer brothers directing this season is that, unlike Season 2, which, again, was still a really great season, Season 2 was basically the aftermath of Season 1, showing sort of like the aftershocks and all the characters and things like that. This season, it really is trying to be something different, and it's honestly really refreshing, and what I think the Duffer brothers did a great job with this season is just the combination of the wit that we love, but also the inner darkness that is looming throughout the entire season. Those two things are blended so well together, probably the best it's ever been. There's never a moment where it feels like the comedy is undermining the darkness, or that it's getting too dark. It never feels like that's what's happening this season. The show can be hilarious and witty at one point and have you in just absolute stitches, and then it can have you as in an emotional wreck, or it can have you screaming, or it can have you just absolutely terrified. And just the way they're able to do that this season, it really just shows how far they've come, how well they laid out what was going to happen this season. I think they did such a great job with that directing wise. It's just such a well realized season of television for sure, and their directing is just so great here, and I just cannot praise it enough. They really do lean very heavily into quite a lot of stuff. I think I don't want to get into it too much because honestly it is very hard to talk about the season without delving into spoilers, but really, without saying too much, I mean, I'll just say it's the funniest it's ever been, but it also is the darkest and most emotional it's ever been, and I think they did such a great job with striking a balance there. But then getting into the writing here, there's just so much I love writing-wise this season. But one of the things that I think was a fear of many people is when you look at the cast, which, I've already talked about them, there are a lot of characters this season. You'll notice things are getting a little bit too overcrowded. So you would think that because of that, things would feel overstuffed. It would feel like there's just too much going on. But this season, what they wisely do is divide everyone so it never really feels that way. This season, without really getting into much, everyone's kind of doing their own thing. Everyone's in their own little groups, and I think that works out quite well. Now, the season starts off, and it's not really like that. You have, like, Dustin and Mike and Lucas and Will and 11, all of them together. And I think they, and Max is in there as well, and they do a really great job with that for sure. But eventually, they split up into their own groups, and I think that really does heighten a lot of the great character work we get this season, because what this is able to do is it gets us to realize some really great character pairings that we just didn't see before. I already talked about 11 and Max, but I have to say, I think that's probably one of the best pairings of this entire season, because we had this really dumb possible storyline in season 2 where 11 was kind of like jealous of Max and things like that. They've kind of thrown that out the window, thankfully, and it's also been a year, so you can see that 11 has really gotten used to Max, but you really get to see these two grow friendship-wise, and you get to see how similar they are, and how Max brings out this more sort of, more girly or normal side out of 11, which I actually really love seeing. There's a great episode where, like, they go to the mall and things like that, and it's just really cool seeing 11 have someone else to talk to, having someone else that, have someone else of the same sex that she can talk to, and that's just not something we've seen yet in this show, but it's really great to see these characters in a legitimately really great place. And 11 especially, we've never really seen that. We've always seen 11 just being constant distress and constantly just freaking out about something, being in fear of her powers, worrying that someone's gonna come after her. This season, she's been able to come to terms with that. She's happily has come to terms with the fact that she has these powers. She's not fearful of them anymore. If anything, she kind of uses them as a buffer now, which is really cool. She and Mike are very much a thing. Hopper is someone that is a true father figure to her, so she's in a really great place this season, and again, I just really love seeing the pairing of these two. It's something that we just didn't get to see in other seasons, and they really play around with that quite nicely here. But another great pairing that I think everyone's absolutely going to love is the pairing of Steve, Dustin, where we would continue that great dynamic, but you also throw in Lucas's sister, Erica, and of course the new character of Robin. And look, I will say this, while I think 11 and Max is probably the best pairing this season, in terms of entertainment, these four are definitely give a lot for sure, and they definitely do a lot in terms of enjoyment-wise. I mean, I love these four together. The way they just bounce off each other is so great. But it also gets us to really show how much Steve does care for Dustin, but also what Robin does for him. Robin is someone who Steve, we realized, did actually used to go to high school with, but Steve has very much changed since then, and they actually give him a really great arc this season. Even though Steve already has had a great arc, they continue that into this season. He becomes even more of a better person than he was, and I think they do a really great job with that, and Dustin is actually kind of the smartest out of all of them. Like I said, he's grown a lot more wiser since the last time we saw him, and it's really cool to see him kind of taking charge here. I don't want to get into too much of what they're specifically doing, but their whole mission that they go on is great, and it's a lot of fun to watch, and they provide a lot of great laughs throughout the season. In fact, most of the laughs I got, most of the really hilarious moments, it came from these four. It came from their interactions, but they really do a lot of great stuff character-wise. Even Lucas's sister, Erica, could have easily just been the annoying sort of kid sister, and that's all they could have given her, but they give her a lot more than just that. She is in a much different position. She's someone who, she actually has a much bigger reason for wanting to be here. There's some really great stuff they do with her and Dustin that I really was not expecting, and I think they did some really great stuff with that pairing. But another big theme of this entire season is the idea of the loss of innocence. These characters, they're not kids anymore, and that is something that they make very clear. They are, in fact, growing up. So it is a little bit weird at first for some when we come into the season and Mike and Eleven are just constantly making out, and you have Hopper telling them to be like 6 inches apart constantly, or you have you have characters like Dustin, who clearly he has gone through a lot. He's coming back from summer vacation and he's become a lot wiser and things like that. Or you have Nancy and Jonathan, who are out of high school now. Steve is also out of high school. I mean, these characters are really growing, and a lot of this season is contingent upon how much you care about these characters. And since we've had the time to grow with them, we really do like seeing them in this different place. It's super refreshing, like I said, to see these characters in a different state mentally, and I think they do a really great job with that here. They're the same characters, but they've grown a lot since the previous season, and that's something that I really did love seeing here for sure, and something that this season does a very good job with. But a lot of the season also does deal with the characters clinging on to their past. While a lot of them, like I said, like Eleven and Mike and some of them have come to terms with it, you have characters like Joyce and Will who are still kind of stuck. Joyce, while she has been, she's had a good amount of time to get over Bob's death, there are still moments where she is thinking about him. There are memories that are triggering. I mean, Bob is someone that she genuinely did love. She had a very good relationship with, and she can't let go of him. There are just certain things that she can't help but just constantly haunt her, and I think they did a really great job of that, but especially what they're doing with Will, considering what he has been through, the fact that he was in the Upside Down, he hasn't really gotten the chance to grow up. He hasn't really gotten the chance to just, move on. So he still is in that state where he is a kid, and he constantly wants to play D&D, and they do some really great stuff with him this season. And like I said, I think out of all of the child actors in terms of the main boys, not Millie Bobby Brown, but Noah Schnapp I think is definitely one of the strongest for sure, and it really is due to what they do with Will here. I honestly was crying quite a few times due to what they were doing with him. I thought it was honestly a very relatable arc. We've all kind of been in that state where we don't really want to move on. Even though we know we're growing up, we want to hold on to childhood things. We don't want to say goodbye to them. And that's kind of where Will is. He's in a very weird stage where his friends, they're growing up rapidly. They have moved on from this stuff. They're outgrowing it, and they want to move on to bigger and better things. While Will, he just wants to hold on to those glory days of them just being in his basement and playing D&D, but that's not where Mike and Lucas are mentally, and I think they do a really great job with that for sure here, and I really loved where they took that story. And like I said, humor-wise, this season is some of the funniest moments in the entire show. A lot of that does come from that pairing of Dustin, Robin, Steve, and Erica. There's one moment especially involving them. It's in, I believe, episodes 3 or 4. There's a certain reveal we get, and that alone was probably one of the funniest things in the entire show. I was laughing for a good, 2 or 3 minutes, and it's easily some of the hardest I've ever laughed at the show, without a doubt. But again, though this season starts off a lot more chill and refreshing than the others have, that doesn't mean it doesn't lean very heavily into dark stuff. And when this season gets dark, oh boy, it packs a lot of punches for sure, definitely. It does not hold back by any stretch of the imagination, and a lot of that is due to what they do with Billy. I don't want to get into it too much, but Billy is very heavily involved with most of the dramatic stuff this year, and they did some great stuff with that character. Now, I will say right now, the Karen Wheeler subplot that I was fearful of, they really don't do too much with that. They kind of put that aside, but it really is for the better, because the whole season, they're really trying to get you to understand Billy more. They dive a lot deeper into his character, why he is the way he is, why he was so hateful towards Max and things like that, and they did an excellent job with that. They gave him a lot more to do, and they took him from being a character that I really didn't like that much to honestly one of my new favorite characters in this show. I love what they did with him this season, and I'm very happy they decided to make him the center of it all, because they give him a much better purpose and a much better story. Yes, they kind of throw away some of the things you might not have liked about him, but it just makes him a better character, and I think they do a good job with that here. Also, without spoiling anything, the threat that they eventually do have to face, like I said, it definitely, they do not hold back at all. This is easily the most challenging threat they've ever had to face yet, and it isn't as simple as just 11 closing a gate or 11 just saving the day. 11, without getting into too much, she is not as powerful as she once was. You know, she can't do it on her own, and I love the way that everyone has to get involved with this threat. I think they do some really cool stuff with that for sure, and it really does a great job of doing things that are similar but changing it up and making it so it's a bit more of a challenge for these characters. You know, they've never really faced a threat quite like this before, and I think they do an excellent job with that here. So yeah, the writing throughout this entire season, it's pretty much spectacular. They do some really great stuff with all the characters, and I'd love to talk more, but like I said, it's really hard to talk about the season without getting into spoilers. So writing, though, is just excellent. I love everything that they do. The cinematography, though, in the show, I mean, look, one of the things about Stranger Things that it's always had a specific look and feel to it, and that definitely has not changed here. However, in terms of 80s stuff, they go even more all out in terms of the styles and things like that. Like I said, just the scenes where Max is teaching Eleven to, you know, be like a normal teenage girl and things like that. There's a lot of great references there, but it never feels like they're just referencing these things just for nostalgic reasons. No, they actually fits pretty organically into the plot. There's one reference especially that could have gotten really tiring, but they did something different with it every single time, and I think it worked quite well. I think it could, like I said, it could have easily gotten annoying, but because they were doing different things with it, I was absolutely loving where they took it, and I couldn't get enough of it. So yeah, the references, they do a really great job with that. Costumes and all that stuff is still so spot on. The look and feel of the show, it's just great, and it's one of those shows that has such a distinct feel to it. But also in terms of effects, I mean, they have really stepped it up in terms of the visual effects here for sure. This is probably the most graphic season we've had of this show yet. Definitely, it goes into some really surprisingly gruesome places that I don't think any of you will really be expecting for sure. But it also does a really great job of, like I said, retaining that great sense of imagination and that great imagery that we've seen from the show before. The cinematography is still fantastic here. It looks great, and they just do a really great job of that. The score as well is really great here. Not just the soundtrack, which is always a highlight, but just the musical score in general. They do a lot more with it. There's one track in there. There's one scene in particular involving a score. It's in the 6th episode, and I can't get enough of it. It's so haunting. It really just really ups the stakes considerably, and they did a really great job with the score here for sure. I think they really went all out. And the editing. Now, this is going to be a complaint for some people. The editing for this season, yes, it is much slower paced than the other scenes have been. The first 3 episodes are pretty low stakes for the most part. They're setting up the central mystery of the season, but it really is a lot more character work. You have things like Mike and Eleven going through relationship problems and things like that, and Hopper, you know, being an overprotective parent. You know, those things might not interest some people, but for me, I actually really like seeing that because, again, we're seeing these characters in a very calm and peaceful place, probably the happiest that they've ever been. So once things start to hit the fan more, and once we start to get into the crux of what this season really is, it feels that much more earned. You feel that much more emotionally because of it. And I feel like if this season was not as slow paced, then it would not feel that way. I wouldn't be as invested. It's mainly because of just how well paced this entire season is, and I think that's something that everyone will probably agree about. I think that's something that they did a very good job with this season. I definitely really did love that for sure. Now, in terms of flaws, I honestly don't really have any. Most of them were pretty much retroactively fixed throughout the season. I will say one that I think some people might have is what they do with Nancy and Jonathan. Without getting into it too much, Nancy and Jonathan this season, they do not have a lot going on thematically. Since they have both been able to come to terms with Barb's death, you know, they got that justice for Barb and things like that, they are in a bit of a different place. You know, they're working for this newspaper, and for the first half of the season, while they are involved, they're much more secluded from everything else. You're kind of wondering, like, how's it going to tie into it all? And eventually it does, but I can understand it for some people it doesn't really fit in, or that they get bored by it. For me, I was never really bored because I knew eventually it would tie in, and it does eventually. And I think they did still do some good stuff with those characters, and they made good use of them. It's just thematically there just isn't as much going on with them as there has in other seasons, and I think that's something that they did do a good job with. They did a good job with keeping them into the story, but not giving them too much to where it feels like they don't need to be in this show anymore, and I think they did a good job with that here. Also, without spoiling anything, David Harbour very heavily teased the last episode of this show and said it's like the most emotional stuff they've done. And yeah, he was absolutely right. I mean, I cannot recall a time that I was this emotional towards a Stranger Things episode ever. Really, this episode, I mean, it takes you to a lot of places. I don't want to spoil too much about it, but he was definitely right when he was saying that it's the best thing they've ever done. I mean, it got me so many times emotionally. I think it's so beautiful the way it's handled. It's just a really great way. And honestly, if this were to be the final season of the show, I know it's not, but it's honestly very satisfying if it were to be a final season. I think they did a really great job with that for sure. And I think regardless of how you feel about those first few episodes, the payoff is so good. I feel like you'll be able to forget about how slow paced some of the seasons, which might be a problem for some people. And really, for me, that payoff was so strong that I really did not have a problem with the beginning of this season at all, just because of how great the finale really is here. But now I have to get into spoilers because, like I said, it's very hard to talk about this season without talking about spoilers. So we're just going to jump right into it. Okay, we're going to talk about what the actual plot of this season is. You know, I kind of danced around what's really going on. So very early on in the season, you know, we have the whole thing with Billy and Karen Wheeler, and I was really happy that they did not go anywhere with that. I was happy that it was just, he clearly had feelings for her. He asked her out. She seemed like she was willing, but then she stopped herself at the last minute. I saw it as Karen realized what she was doing. She realized that she was jeopardizing her entire family. She didn't want to betray her entire family, so she stopped herself. But while Billy was actually planning on, on doing things with her and getting her and being seducing her and things like that, that's when the whole accident happens. It's when he gets in that car accident. That's when he's pulled into the Upside Down, and for the rest of the season Billy is pretty much in Will's position. However, unlike Will, Billy is a lot more ferocious. Billy is far more feral. He's being used as not just a host. He is as a host, but basically at this point the Mind Flayer has completely taken over him. Throughout the rest of the season, we really don't see the real Billy, and that gives us a lot more breathing room to get into who Billy really is. And I thought it was a very wise choice to do that, and I really love that they did decide to use Billy as the main threat of the season, because they built him up so well as someone who could be a really great threat, but not someone they really did anything with. Season 2, he was just someone who was taunting Max occasionally, and then she eventually got over it, and eventually she told him that she wasn't going to take it anymore. This season, he's way more of a physical challenge, and I think they did a really great job with the physicality there, and that really is due to Decree Montgomery. I mean, he sold it so well, but the scene that really gets me with him is when you have the scene with Eleven and all of them, and you think it's going to be just like it usually is, where she's able to defeat him by just, holding him down or whatever, but it turns out he is such a menacing presence that he actually is hurting Eleven. The Mind Flayer is trying to destroy Eleven because Eleven has closed that portal so many times, and I think that that was a brilliant idea because again, you run the risk by having the Mind Flayer in the first 3 seasons. That's the same villain in the first 3 seasons. You're running the risk of just a retread. So I like the idea that 11 is not as powerful, that she actually is a bit more challenged this season, and that she is just as much threatened by this presence as everyone else is. And I really did love seeing that here for sure. And I think the scene where Billy is just, throwing her around and things like that, and, 11 realizes that she's not going to be able to beat him as easily as she thinks she is, I think that's one of the best sequences in the entire show, and I think that really takes this season to new heights. That's the moment when you realize the true potential that this season really does have, and I think they did an excellent job with that sequence for sure, and because of how great that sequence is, it really does forward the momentum for the entire season. You realize that this is not going to be as simple, like I said, as just Elle closing the portal. It's much more complex of a situation than that, and I really like seeing that here. And what the Mind Flayer's plan is this season is much different than we've seen in others. It's not like there's just one host. No, Billy is a host that is trying to get to others to basically create sort of like an invasion of the body snatcher scenario. The Mind Flayer's trying to take over a mass amount of people, and that was a fantastic idea. I love the idea that basically everyone's turning into like these mindless zombies and things like that, and that perfectly ties into like the fertilizer thing that Nancy and Jonathan were doing. We realize that Mrs. Driscoll very likely was influenced by the Mind Flayer, and that's why she was doing what she was doing, which I think is a really interesting idea for sure. And I liked what they were doing with like Heather and things like that, even though we didn't really get to know her that much on her own. I just liked that, Billy wasn't just a host. His main mission was to, like, recruit all these others and start this army of zombies, essentially. I think it was a really cool idea, and they took that to some really scary place for sure, but still not forgetting that Billy is the main antagonist, and that's what they did a really great job with. I feel like a lesser show, they would try to use everyone as an antagonist, but this show wisely kept the focus on Billy and that conflict of Billy versus 11, and they did a really great job with that here for sure. And just the way that the Mind Flayer was weakening 11. I mean, the stuff with her leg, I mean, when I was talking about gruesome scenes, that's exactly what I was talking about. When she is like that one creature in her leg and things like that, oh, I mean, we have seen 11 be put through the ringer, but never to this extent. And again, it's because of how positive she is throughout the entire season that this comes as that much more of a shock. I was legitimately not expecting them to put 11 in this much pain again, but seeing her having to fight through it and seeing her not being able to stop Billy as easily as she normally can, it's just devastating to watch, and they did such an incredible job with that. So once she does eventually get through to Billy, it feels that much more satisfying, and that's something I really did love here. And 11 being a lot less effective really gets her to tap more into Billy's childhood. And there's that moment where, sure, we already knew that he was abused by his father, but we get a lot more into that, where we realize that his mother actually, he had a loving relationship with. These two really did have this great devotion for each other, when he was in the waves and things like that, when he was surfing, and she was always there by his side, but then she left because of their father, and that's what made Billy so resentful and things like that, and that's what really fueled that rage inside of him. And I think they did such a great job with that. It made Billy such a more three-dimensional character, and not just a one-note guy who just is this hateful sort of character. I'm glad that they took him into a place where you see that I think he genuinely did love Max, but because of that abuse from his father, that's what turned him into such a hateful person, and I think they did a really great job with that for sure. I cared a lot more about Billy this time around. A lot of that really is due to the work they did with him this season. And because of us caring for Billy, when he does eventually decide to sacrifice himself, it's that much more heartbreaking. And you see Max just absolutely crushed by it, and him telling her that he's sorry. And it feels so genuine because we know what he's apologizing for. He's not apologizing for him just saying, oh, yeah, you can't be with Lucas. No, he's apologizing for the fact that those two never had a good relationship. He, I think, wanted to love his sister. He wanted to be a good brother for her, but because of that hatred, he never got to. He was always kind of stuck, and he was always kind of, that's why he was so spiteful throughout his entire life. And again, it took a character that I just kind of thought was a douche in season 2, and it gave him so much more layers, and it makes that line feel so much more powerful. And the fact that Billy is dead, it feels so satisfying. Like, I don't need him to be back now. I feel like they've done everything they can with that character, and I love that. I love the way that's executed, and I think they handled that moment absolutely perfectly. Definitely. But of course, very early on, we come to realize that the Mind Flayer is not the only threat we're dealing with this season. The other threat of this season are these Russians. And look, I can understand if some people do not like this idea because it's cheesy, it's dumb, but again, this is the 80s, and you have to remember, at this point in the 80s, you know, the Russians were the villain in everything. So it really is not that implausible that the Russians, were in fact this force and that they're operating and there's that one Russian that looks and talks just like Arnold Schwarzenegger and things like that. So, again, I can understand why some people might think it's a bit far-fetched, but they had fun with it. They clearly know that it's a little bit dumb, and I think they just did a good job with it. I like that the Russians weren't the huge threat of the season. They definitely were a threat, but they focused on the Mind Flayer. The Russians are clearly going to use the Mind Flayer to their advantage moving forward, but I like what they ended up doing with them this season, and I think their inclusion actually worked quite nicely, and it gave Hopper some really great moments for sure. And it gets Hopper and Joyce some really great moments. I love that Hopper, throughout almost this entire season, is just so pissed off. He's, beating up anyone that gets in his way, torturing the mayor, torturing all these guards. I mean, he's just an absolute badass this season. I think they do some really great stuff with that for sure. But it also gets to play around with the Joyce and Hopper dynamic really well. I mean, the stuff when, just early on the season where Joyce is counseling Hopper into possibly, into talking to 11 about setting those boundaries between her and Mike and things like that. I mean, you really do see how much that pairing has evolved. And again, that's one of the reasons the season really benefits from splitting up everyone into pairs. And I think they do a really great job with that here for sure. But another addition I loved with the Russians is what it does with that character of Alexei. Alexei is someone who, he is Russian, but he's a kind of a traitor. He is not nearly as involved with all this stuff. Murray is someone who knows Russian and translates it, and their whole dynamic, I think, is so great. And honestly, Alexei is a character that, again, he's not a major character, but when he dies in the season, I legitimately felt it. I really did. And I think it really does speak volumes for how great of a season this is when you got me to cry over a character that wasn't even that major, but I don't know, I just, because he was so pure and he was just so innocent and wasn't even supposed to be in this situation, and was probably one of the most innocent out of all of the characters in this show, I thought it was absolutely heartbreaking when Alexei was killed. I really did feel it there for sure. And, the moment where Joyce thinks that they can maybe save them and things like that, I think it's absolutely heartbreaking, and I really did love the way that scene was done. I think they did an excellent job towards that. But also having the Russians, it gives us that really great dynamic of, Dustin, Robin, Steve, and Erica. And I love what they did with this pairing. And I love the way they kind of mislead you into thinking that Robin is going to be this love interest for Steve. The way she starts out, she talks about how, she was nerdy, but she always wanted to be like the popular kids and things like that, and that she fantasized. You think it's presumably about Steve, and then they do that great job where you can see that Steve, he's starting to grow attracted to her because he has gotten over Nancy, and he's kind of using, he kind of is starting to get over Nancy by wanting to be with her. But then you realize that Robin wasn't jealous of, the girl looking at Steve. No, she was jealous that Steve was looking at this other girl that she liked. So, yeah, it turns out Robin is actually a lesbian, and that Robin has feelings for this other girl. And I thought this was a really great idea because it doesn't try to force a relationship for Steve. It shows that you can have a character for Steve that he does not have to be romantically involved with. And how refreshing is that to see? How often do you see a girl come into the mix for a pre-established character? They start off and, eventually they end up in a relationship. So it's actually really refreshing that we're not getting that with Robin, that Robin is simply just going to be a friend for Steve. And that moment where, she's talking to Steve about how she has these feelings and Steve's okay with it, that for me is the moment where I realize how great of a character Robin really was and how organically she really fit into this ensemble. And I think they did such a great job with that for sure. And I love where it really does take Steve as a character where, he's someone who he is going to look for love eventually, but he's also focusing on himself career-wise and them getting that job at Family Video and things like that. It's really great stuff, and I can't wait to see where they end up going with those two for sure. I think Robin is exactly the kind of friend that Steve needs, and even the stuff with Dustin and Erica, again, I love the moment where Dustin is talking to Erica, and basically, he tells her how she is just as much of a nerd. She's someone who's very good at math, she's someone who's very much into My Little Pony, and I kind of see this as like, Erica's going to be sort of like an ally for them. Erica's going to be not necessarily part of their group, but someone that they can rely on, someone that I think Dustin has a much stronger bond with now, and again, I never knew I needed these two to be this close in terms of a friendship, but I really like seeing that. I actually really like what they're doing there, and I think they can do a lot with that dynamic for sure. I think it took Dustin to some really interesting places, and I like that they paired him up with Erica. You would have thought that they kept him with Steve, but they did that last season. Yes, Steve and him have a great bond, but we already know they have a great bond, so I thought it was very smart for them to pair him up with Erica throughout the most of the season. I thought that worked quite well here. But really, it's that finale where everything does come together. And look, the Alexi stuff, I definitely cried out for sure. But the finale, that is a different story. I cried maybe 3 or 4 times throughout just this finale alone. I'm not even joking to you. I mean, there was so much to love about it. And there are some top moments just in this finale too. When Joyce and Hopper show up, I literally cheered. I thought it was such a great moment for sure. I love the way that was done. But even some of the smaller character moments where, you have Joyce and you have Hopper, and while Joyce has been someone who has been grieving over Bob, you can tell that she genuinely does care for Hopper. She wants to try to start to pursue a relationship with him, and she asks him out on this date and things like that. And I was really rooting for those two, and you have that great moment with him and 11 and things like that, and you guys know what I'm getting to. Hopper ends up sacrificing himself. He ends up sacrificing himself, and it's heartbreaking. It's not something that I think any of us were really expecting them to do. I think people sort of, we can speculate it, but I really did not think they were going to kill Hopper. I thought it was going to be Steve. I thought that maybe he was going to go. I did not think that Hopper was going to die, but no, they actually do kill Hopper, and it was heartbreaking. The way that was done with him, sacrificing himself for all those Russians who, like I said, he was a badass throughout that entire thing, but I like that he wasn't completely invincible. I like that he did end up having to sacrifice himself there when 11 does have to close the gate. I thought was a really great moment, and they did some really great stuff there for sure. But especially the scene that got me is when 11, and of course when he died I cried, but when 11 finds out that he was killed, I just lost it. That was such a heartbreaking moment. Hopper was really someone who turned 11's life around for the better. He really kind of took her in, and now she's been a much more calmer person. She's really learned to deal with a lot of the stress in her life, and she's been able to move on from her traumatic past. And just knowing that he's dead, I mean, it's just absolutely heartbreaking. But it's not a complete and utter loss, because we now know that Joyce and Will, they are basically going to adopt her. They're going to bring her into their family, and they are now getting out of Hawkins, which seems like a good choice. You know, it makes sense to get out of Hawkins, obviously, because of all the stuff that's happened there. There's all these conspiracy theories and things like that. But I love the idea that 11 now, because of everything that she's been through, with her having to take down the Mind Flayer and things like that, and her having to, you know, get into Billy's memories, she's just used her powers so much to the point where she's kind of lost them temporarily. I love that idea. I don't think this is going to be permanent. I think Mike is right when he says, you know, they're going to come back eventually, but I do think that we're going to see her struggle a bit, and I'm interested in seeing an 11 that can't rely on her powers. And this entire season, she was using them. Even in stuff like just spying on Mike for, you know, when he was supposedly, you know, lying and things like that. You know, just fun stuff like that. She can't do that anymore. Her powers are not working the way they should. And I really love that idea. But also seeing them venture out of Hawkins and go elsewhere, that's something we really have not seen yet on the show. Now, we know, obviously, there are those other, you know, other versions of 11 out there. I don't know if they're going to tie that back in. I don't think they're going to, because they didn't have anything to do with that this season. That wasn't brought up once, and I feel like they've just kind of abandoned that. But it definitely does open up a wide amount of possibilities by venturing out of Hawkins, and I'm excited to see what they end up doing there for sure. But then that letter that Hopper delivers to 11, which was supposed to be the apology, you know, that when he finally talked to her and Mike, which he never got to do, was just absolutely crushing. It was such a great way of kind of closing out the entire series. Like I said, if this was the final episode of the entire series, I would have been satisfied. Moments like with Will, where he is giving his game away to, you know, to Erica, and he's trying to finally move on from it. Even though he's been having a hard time, he's trying to finally move on and hopefully, you know, just start being a young adult, and having to realize that he needs to grow up. Even though it's sort of a struggle, he needs to grow up. He needs to return that game, and I think that was a really great moment. Or, like I said, the stuff with 11 when she has the letter, or Joyce finally being able to move out of Hawkins because of all the trauma that's happened there. And then seeing everyone saying goodbye, the moment with Nancy and Jonathan, I got like Endgame vibes. Like, that's how great of a final scene this really was. Now, this was another thing I decided to keep out of my review because it would lean too heavily into spoilers. So throughout the season, we are told that Dustin has this girlfriend named Susie. You know, he's constantly talking about her. He's trying to get her on his walkie. She's not answering. A lot of people are thinking that he's delusional, that she doesn't exist. It turns out at the last moment in the finale, she does in fact exist, and she is just as quirky and weird as you can imagine, and I already love this pairing. I love this dynamic that they have. When she calls him Dusty Bun and things like that, it's absolutely hysterical, but it also leads to one of the funniest moments of the entire series, probably with the never-ending story theme. I mean, I was in stitches when that happened. I thought that was just so funny, the way that was done, and then when Max and Lucas are mocking him for it, just so great, and I love the fact that Susie was in fact real. It shows Dustin is actually in a much different place than we would expect him to be. Again, he's grown much wiser throughout this, and I like that Dustin actually does have Susie now, because there's a lot they can do with that in the next season. The fact that, you know, she's in another state and things like that. And again, we know that 11 and all of them, they're venturing out of Hawkins, so maybe there's a possibility that, hey, they meet up with Susie, and we get more with Susie next year. I have no doubt that we'll get to see more of Susie next year for sure. I really liked that small little dynamic that they had. I like that she kind of ends up helping them, saving the world, and I think that was just absolutely great. It was something that started off as just simply a small joke, but actually turned into something far more prominent than you would imagine. And that's something that Stranger Things just does so well. They'll take things that just seem absolutely outlandish and actually make them work. And I think Susie is a very good example of that. But then, of course, we have the post-credit scene, which everyone has been talking about. Look, I'm just going to say this right now. I really want to pretend that this is not happening. I want to pretend that Hopper is not coming back. I'm hoping that that's not the American that they're referring to. And I'm hoping this is one of those things that they're just kind of teasing. They're just teasing, seeing if it works. And then if it doesn't, then they'll just get rid of it entirely, like what they did with Call and all of them this season. Again, they were never mentioned once. So I kind of hope that's what they're doing, but I don't know, maybe that's just wishful thinking. And here's the thing, though. After everything we got here, you know, the tearful goodbye with 11 reading that letter and things like that, Joyce seeming like the one reason that she wanted to stay in Hawkins really was for Hopper to try out that relationship, but now having to leave because, and now finally feeling like she has a reason to leave because of everything that's happened, you know, 11 leaving with Joyce and all of them, finally getting a life outside of Hawkins, and all of them really getting to move on from that trauma and things like that. I just don't think it makes sense thematically to keep this character alive, and I hope that's not what they're doing. I don't know how this makes any sense whatsoever. I feel like if they bring Hopper back, it's going to ruin any stretch of believability that the show has had, and I just am hoping that that's not what they're doing, because if it is what they're doing, it'll ruin the entire emotional payoff of this season. The best stuff of this final episode really does come from that stuff with Hopper. Yes, the Billy stuff is great. Yes, I love all the stuff with, you know, 11 and her now not having her powers anymore and things like that. But really the most emotional stuff is the fact that they actually had the balls to kill off Hopper. They actually made a daring decision. They're actually willing to move forward with the story. And if you keep him alive, it just halts the momentum. It halts that completely. And I really hope that's not what they're doing. But we'll just have to see. Hey, hell, maybe they won't be renewed. Maybe this is the only season and we won't even have to worry about that. But either way, this was still a fantastic ending. The post-credit scene notwithstanding, it was incredibly impactful. I was very touched by the way they did. I thought it was absolutely beautiful. And like I said, if it had not been for that post-credit scene, this could have worked as a perfect ending to the show, and I would have been absolutely okay with them just wrapping it up here. So overall, Stranger Things Season 3 exceed my expectations in more ways than I ever could have imagined. It does a great job of retaining the wit and fun we expect for this show to have, but also really doubling down on the darkness, really doubling down on the themes of growing up, but also the characters are the strongest that they've ever been. It gives us some of the best character work to date. It really evolves a lot of these characters to some very interesting places, and like I said before, if this is the final season we get, if this was to be the final season, I honestly wouldn't be satisfied if they ended it here. It's a really great way to wrap things up. It's a very, very beautiful, but also a very highly emotional season for sure. It's the funniest it's ever been. It has some of the best, you know, some of the best moments in the entire show. It really does show the possibilities of where they can really take a show like this and things like that. It really expands the world quite well. It just does everything that a show in its third season should do. It really is a very refreshing season. It doesn't at all retread like some people might have feared it would. It overall is everything that I could have hoped it would be. It remains one of the best shows on TV for many of the reasons I just mentioned. And because of that, I am absolutely going to give Stranger Things Season 3 overall an A+. Seriously, guys, in a summer that really has not been all that great for movies, this is definitely more of what I expect. This is really turning it up to 11 in just an amazing way. Pun absolutely intended for sure. Either way, guys, that's it for this review. Hope you guys enjoyed. Let me know what you guys thought of this season overall. Left your thoughts in it. Let me know spoilers, all that kind of stuff. We'll see you guys in my next video, and I will see you guys for that. Okay, bye.